Okay. Call the Academic Achievement Committee meeting to order. First order of business, I guess, is to get a permanent chair for the 2023 year. If anyone else would greatly like that honor, I will happily leave it to them. If not, I will be willing to serve for 1 more year.
I'll nominate Dr. Darian for chair.
I'll second that.
Any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. It's such an onerous job. We have so many meetings, partly because the state does not provide us with data in a timely way, but now that we have it, I'll turn the meeting over to Melissa to tell us where we're at.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Mrs. Devlin for preparing a lot of information for this evening for the Academic Achievement Report, and we'll be looking at data from, if you didn't get a chance to look at the presentation, there is AP, which is national data at the high school level. We have state assessment data from grades 3 through 11, and then we will have local assessment data in grades K through 11, 8 that we'll be looking at, 8. And then, comparing that to some of our peers, in addition to, just talking about some of the areas that we are most proud of and some of the areas where, we are constantly looking for any way to improve, so.
Yeah, in front of you, because there's so much data, and I'm gonna just apologize up front that there are like 80 some slides. It just takes that many and we will not labor over many of them. But that piece of paper that you have in front of you is just a place to capture any questions. We'll stop a few times through the presentation. Can you hear me okay over there? Okay. We'll stop a few times through the presentation.
Can you check this, Cecilia?
Sure. Cecilia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. The owl is a success. So we'll stop a few times, but there's so much data and there's so many different ways that we kind of look at it that if you had questions and you're not even sure what the question might be or how to phrase it, I just wanted to give everybody a place to kind of jot those thoughts down, and then we'll take some pauses and have a chance to kind of digest some of those questions and take a look at what comes up from all of this.
A quick thought, can you make those slides available to us online?
They are already linked to the agenda for tonight. We did update, there was a draft originally shared, and now the updated presentation is what you'll see tonight. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Really, we just start with kind of an overview of some of our basic pieces about the district, including our current student demographics, which is displayed in the form of that pie graph. The one sliver that is lacking a label is our Asian population, which is just about 1.3%. So it was just low enough that it didn't show up with the key attached to it.
Ms. Devlin, is this data like from the current year, or is this back?
There's a little bit of a mashup, but that data is current based on November enrollment.
Okay.
So that was our most recent enrollment report. That is current. The student demographics that you see are also current from our October report from PIMS to the state. So those are current pieces right there, because I feel like last year I reported on last year's current. So there will be, thank you for asking, and if there's any time I don't specify if it's current year or prior year, please don't hesitate to remind me. So this is looking at our total enrollment. You can see on the right-hand side our overall total, and then where we are with our low-income population, which has shown about a 3.5 to 3.8, I think, % increase just for this school year. So that has been a notable shift that we've recognized. And special ed is still hovering right around that 21-ish %. We broke out what categories of special education students are part of our special ed population, so you can see what that looks like across the various denotations within special education. So you see our autistic population, our specific learning disability population is the highest, our other health impairment is next below that. Speech and language tends to come up pretty high. Those are kids who don't need a lot of services, and it's not often a big academic hindrance, but those are students who are all counted in that special education population.
As often is the case, most, I don't have the numbers broken down, but most other health impairment is ADHD. that's what falls under there, which is, would be most representative, is broken down, but these are the 13 categories that are given to us from the federal government.
And what's our percentage for special education? Did you say 20?
About 20, 21.
Right around
Percent.
21%.
And what's the state average? Because we're over the state
Yeah, it's
average.
closer to 17, state
Yeah.
average.
And how's that ratio break up? The state average from speech to the rest of the,
I can pull that up
Okay.
specifically, but on that chart, you'll see that, excuse me. On the gray bar is the state, and the colored bar is us. So speech and language, we're below. Specific learning disability, that looks almost dead even to me, but I'm at an angle. Other health impairment, we're a little higher. And in a district this size, that difference can be a couple of kids that come in with that disability, and we see them for X number of years, and then, so this shifts regularly. So starting with our national data, our advanced placement population, we had 151 tested subject and students last year. I can't say that's 151 students because many take multiple AP assessments, but overall seeing an average score of 3.58. I then broke that out by subject so that you could see subject by subject where we are above the state average, which is, I think, a nice way to look at that. Sorry, the colors don't translate as well on this screen. But of those 4 subject areas, 3 out of 4, we are above the state average. That might help. Thanks, Mary. That's better, thank you.
Yeah, that's much better, thank you. Yeah, the 5 is the best score you can get, you know, just
So all the kids got a 5.
All 6.
all 6 of those kids
Yeah.
get 5.
I think it's important to note how many students are testing, just because it helps kind of look at what that ratio looks like overall. So in the next 5 subject areas, here were our results. The blue indicating that we were above the state average. If it's not highlighted, that meant we were at or below.
One of the things I'd be interested in these scores is to look at the kids that get below a 3 and see if that correlates with grade level. I still have trouble with the idea that a sophomore is taking a college placement course, although if they do well on it, that's wonderful. But I'm curious as to whether there's a success.
That's a good piece we can look into. Here's our next 4, all 4 of those above the state average. And the last grouping, again, 3 out of 4 of those content areas above the state average. Again, 5 in statistics also.
Now, I think there's some courses where we may not be adequately preparing the students for the AP tests. I would just say from observing as a parent, I know some classes that were taken where I'm not sure the kids were being adequately prepared. There were a lot of other issues, though, that went on with things other than education, though.
Sure.
At certain times that may have contributed to that, but, you know, Al's concern is the student age. I would say with the classes that we may not be getting to the average, we should be looking at what we're doing and seeing if.
And our philosophy over the last few years too is that, you know, we want to encourage kids to have access to that level of coursework, even if they are not projected to be a 5 or a 4 necessarily. You want a student to be successful, but just the idea of access to a college level content for all students is a powerful thing for them in high school, whether it is through a dual enrollment course or whether it's through an AP. One, to get a sense of where they stand as they are getting towards the end of their high school career, but also, that giving them an opportunity to succeed there, where, sometimes by the time you know for sure that a student isn't likely to get that 4, that 5, it's late in the school year and maybe that experience was still valuable to them. So there is that push and pull of access to it, versus the high mean score of the students who are taking it.
Well, I mean,
And you can kind of see the courses.
but I think we'd like them to get the
They need to
college
be-
credit if they could.
Absolutely.
So I think
And you'll look at some of
our
those.
job is to make sure that if they're taking the test, that they meet the objectives.
Definitely, and the goal is to always have students able to succeed on that test. In Kutztown, we pay for the tests here as a district, it's a district expense. And so every student takes the test. That's, I don't want to say it's not typical, because I don't have the numbers on that, but a lot of the districts don't do that, in our neighboring districts as well.
Can we make, or can we increase the enrollment for the APs? I mean, because we're a small district, I don't know if we're reaching a saturation point or not, but, obviously we want to make these classes available to as many students as possible.
Yeah.
Can we increase the enrollment?
I think we're pushing the envelope of that saturation point. And when you look at those number of students in that right column, and a lot of times the score in the mean score column, some of the scores that are the highest scores are the most selective courses. And I say selective, in 2 ways. Students are selecting them, and also, we might not encourage a kid to take an AP Chem if they're, not have the requisite skills for that. So you'll see some smaller numbers there. Even statistics is a real small number of kids, only 3, but highly successful. So there's a little bit of a push.
I'm not going to necessarily disagree with the things you've said, but I just want to present another side to that, which is, I know chemistry is not, but a lot of the other subjects, they are taking the AP course instead of the normal high school course.
Right.
Which means that if they don't do well in the AP course, they're not learning that material, and they've never had a chance to learn regular material, which might be a deficit rather than a positive experience simply because they were challenged beyond their abilities. So it's not always necessarily a good thing that someone takes one of these courses because they're missing the other stuff. In fact, we get to 8th grade math, there's a portion to that.
Sure, and to that point as well, a student in a district who might take biology and then take AP biology has a leg up because they've learned the content and now they're going deeper in the content. Whereas if they're taking it once and only once and it's that AP opportunity, that doesn't provide that extra year for digging deeper into that content.
And as Dr. Weaver frighteningly reminded me, in my ear, some of the research that we are spending a lot of time with now on just being future ready, one of the predictors is access and determining access by an A, B, or C in the course. Of course, if the student gets a D or an F, that access isn't a predictor of success post-high school, but access and an A, B, or a C, which an A, B, or a C is a much lower standard than a 4, or probably even a 3 in reality. It shows students that get C's and could not get a 3 on the exam.
How are the numbers this year, for example, compared to past years?
Beat me to it, that's the very next slide. So our current enrollment numbers, I grabbed today, we have 134 students enrolled in AP courses for this year across 12 subject areas, which is, 4, 8, 12, I think 2 courses less than last year.
So it's comparable.
Yeah, absolutely. The way it shakes out in the Future Ready Index, this was some interesting data. They take all of the seniors and they identify a percentage of the seniors who accessed AP or college courses. And so that figure is represented on the screen now. 42% of our current seniors accessed AP coursework and 5.4% accessed college courses.
Thought I just gave, another number I'd be interested in is a correlation between the AP score and the final grade. we got kids getting 2s, we're getting A's, there's something wrong.
That's not hard to access, it just takes a little time to pull out, but we can do that.
What, do we have a target as to what type of participation we want with the AP? If we're at 42% now, are we looking to increase that?
The state has not yet set targets. They are working on, because what the state is doing in the Future Ready Index is looking at AP participation or advanced coursework, college course enrollment, in addition to CTE enrollment. So career and technical education counts in that number. Right now, we are sitting above the state average. I think we're at 56%. The state is at about 54, but they have not yet set benchmarks for that. So there's no goal that we're attempting to reach at this stage. We just have those numbers.
We have to look at it as a whole pie because, you know, you just think anything that a student does essentially takes a credit out of their day, right? Like a credit of seat time out of their day. And right now, we're focusing on, we believe we should better leverage the students taking college courses, and not because we're inherently placing a educational value on one versus the next, but there's a financial value to that college course where there can be, if you get the 3 for some schools, 4s and 5s for the AP, you can get that financial value when you go onto a school. But if you go take 6 credits at Kutztown University, first of all, that, you know, those 6 credits really replace like 1 credit, 3 credits here, because the 3 credit AP is the full year where you can take 2 courses at the university semester by semester. And KU can tell you exactly where that's going to transfer, and you can get some guaranteed savings on the back end of it. So we want to look at it from a variety of standpoints, but one of them is how can we save our families as much money as possible as they look into that post-secondary education. You know, and for just Kutztown University, for example, it's $99, our current dual enrollment is $99 a credit. The Education Foundation picks up 150 of that, 300, and there can be another additional request if there's a need, because there are other costs, there's books, etc. And there's a couple of fees, but there's also ways that students can, say for example, a student who's getting a 5 on a Spanish AP Spanish test would likely test into level 3 Spanish at Kutztown University, and if they just take the 1 class and pass it, they get 9 credits for the cost of 3, because they've tested beyond 1 and 2. So there's just we're trying to find ways to help, KU is to help us some too in making it a little more accessible from a time standpoint, but we've had the best conversations we've had in years with them and their admissions office and the registrar's office just in the last month and a half about getting to that, because there's just, you know, if you can save thousands of dollars on your eventual student loans and your college education by taking courses during high school, you know, a couple $100 at a time, that's huge for families in addition.
All right, and that's our national data at this stage. Are there any specific questions that we didn't touch on already? Or I'll move on to the state data. Good? Okay. So a lot of this is coming directly from the Future Ready Index. Some of it is coming from our Ed Insight data source to kind of break that down a little further to show some more specifics. But what we'll look at are the PSSA results overall and the PVOS growth, and those will go building by building. You will see colors indicated. You can pretty much assume they're what you would expect. Red means we're not meeting the standard that has been set by the state. Green means that we are meeting it, and blue would mean that we are exceeding it. So those colors are going to jump right out at you. But we'll take a little time to look at each of those for each building. And then we'll get to the high school and we'll look at Keystone exams, including some of the trajectory from 3rd through Keystone of how our students are doing compared to the state. So we'll start with Greenwich, and of course we want to lead with the experiences our students have and not just their data, because kids are what really tell the story. So at Greenwich, just to give the current, most recent snapshot, now this data comes from the Future Ready Index. So
We're just telling the story though first. That was Mrs.
Yeah,
Caulfield.
I'm
That was
sorry.
Mrs. Caulfield's class, where they raised
Part of the science unit that they have in first grade is they take caterpillars and talk about the stages of development, and then when the caterpillars do going into a butterfly, then they release them out on the back program.
So this is the demographic info that's presented in the Future Ready Index for Greenwich, specifically for 18-19 through 21-22. And I think it's just helpful to see those trend lines. And when you look at each building and step back and compare after the fact, you can look at those slides individually. The differences are really notable among all the buildings. So they each have unique factors that they're dealing with in terms of the population of students.
You see Greenwich, there's a little fluctuation there, demographics, but largely when you span out over a couple of years, there's not much of a change in the demographics of Greenwich. They're largely the same. And anything we look at with Greenwich Elementary, just the small denominator of students putting into percentages is just, you really are talking about a handful of students can dramatically change a percentage.
And with that, one of the things that we need to talk about relative to PSSA's and Keystones is participation, because there are a few places where our participation did have an impact on our overall score reporting. So this is the snapshot of achievement. So this is specifically based on the 21-22 PSSA results compared to the statewide average and the statewide goal. Now, a couple things I want to point out. The statewide average for ELA is the statewide average for grades 3 through 11. So on every single slide, you will see the statewide average is 54.1 for ELA. It doesn't change. They took a big average. The statewide goal is the incremental goal that was set from where they'd like us to, where we are to where we want to be in 2030. That shows the statewide goal, and we've shared some of how we've broken those goals down to work on things within our leadership team. You'll see math in the center, and then science, only 4th grade takes science, and that's on the right-hand side.
So then the statewide goal was also averaged across 3rd through 11th.
So is the color indicating us against the goal or against the average?
It's us against the statewide goal. They don't really care. They give us the average,
Okay.
but we'll break some of these down a little further too. So that's achievement. Now, separate from achievement, we look at growth, which takes that average of PSSA results over time to give us a growth score. The growth score is not a percentage. It is a number assigned based on how, I can never explain this quite right.
It's a metric that was created specifically for it. It's an NCE, which outside of the context of PBAS, outside the context of PSSAs in Pennsylvania, and every bit of the context, it's meaningless. It only means something there. So there's no external application of it.
No, it gives us a secondary indicator to say over time, this is how our students are growing, not just how they achieved at that single moment in time in 1 year. And I think that's the important thing to always remember with the achievement pieces. That was a single moment in time for that student, which is why we're going to look at local data too, to also just get a snapshot of where our kids are on the day-to-day. So achievement and growth, there we go. So then looking at kind of the pie chart for reading and math, this just shows the overall breakdown of proficiencies. So advanced is blue, proficient is green, yellow is basic, and red is below basic.
So I just have a quick question. If we're talking about the average versus the growth, would you expect based on the growth score, say for math at Greenwich of being a 78, that point in time was only 47.8? That seems like there's a large gap there. So would you expect this year with PSSA scores that it would be more in line with what we're seeing on the academic growth score?
No, because that's not an average. So this NC number was normed to is 70. That in any given year, a PBAS score of 70 is the expectation. That means you're meeting the expectations of the students. It really has no direct connection to that percentage score of the proficiency. All that tells us that is over 70. That means that our percentage score is better than what the state predicted.
But we would anticipate that I understand that's not an average, but if we're saying our growth score is at a 78, would we expect there to be a trend then that this year KSSA scores should be improving.
So, yeah, yeah, I mean, so, right, their projection for us will now have increased.
Yeah.
So in a sense, maintaining the growth score actually gets a little bit more difficult the better you do, because it will increase. Now the kids change and it's individualized, but largely, for the kids in 4th and 5th grade, have a growth score, yes, the state is now believing they will be better because they performed better than predicted the previous year. So in theory, over time, that yes, that should drive the.
Well, we're just anticipating, right, we're coming off of COVID, so our scores lower, would they anticipate that they should get higher? That's what I was trying to.
One of the things that PBOS allows us to do, they are able to provide projections so that looking to the future, they can tell us which groups of students they expect will be in the proficient range or in the advanced range, which gives us data to help work with students who may not be projected to be successful. That's one of the really valuable pieces that PBOS can give us.
They don't think they've ever made it clear that people's expected growth, which is what this is measuring against, is that determined through our history, statewide? Is it criterion-based? Is it norm-based? I don't think they've ever made that clear, and I wonder if they have since.
The standard or the score?
No, what they determine expected growth to be. How do they determine how much growth is to be expected? At one point, it was based on averages, way back when they first started. Now that they have an accumulation of data, I thought I heard a few years ago that they were basing it on our history. In other words, what was the growth in the past in Kutztown? Are we maintaining that? Or are we exceeding what we did in the past? And I'm wondering if they've ever made that clear in the last.
I hesitate because one of the things that the state is largely saying is, don't put too much weight on this right now because we don't have that 3-year average anymore. So we're off our game right now because there was no score in 1920.
Okay, but is it the 3-year average of Kutztown, or 3-year average of the state, or similar demographics? That's the part I've always wrestled with PBOS.
So it takes the individual score of a student if they have a prior history. And then, yeah, I believe the metric that they apply to that is previous history of school compared to state on the assessment. But exactly what that formula is a mystery.
Well,
We could probably spend hours on just PFAS, but I certainly will get a little better clarification on what the current metric is
they've
looking
never
like.
been clear on what they did. I just wonder if that has changed.
Can you actually go back a slide? I have one quick question.
Sure.
One more. So right now, we're proficient, say, let's pull out the English language arts, 62.2, statewide goal is 81.1. Go to the next slide. If we continue to meet that statewide growth standard through 2030, does that theoretically place us at the statewide goal?
Theoretically, yes.
But they're always different kids.
That's the problem. The PBOS score is based on the population in that building now. It isn't necessarily going to tell us how those students will do when they get to middle school.
PBOS isn't necessarily that. It actually looks at each individual kid's growth.
Mhm.
It's not an average of this is where the school was, at the beginning and how much did they grow. It's actually looking at the individuals,
Yes.
which at least is a little more granular than most measures.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is our overall proficiency breakdown for reading and math for Greenwich, and then grade level we'll get to in just a second. Any questions here?
I might be jumping ahead, you probably have this. My own experience was I can live with a kid who's basic. It's the below basic that presents a real challenge, and I'm curious as to how many of the below basic kids are special needs.
I didn't pull that specifically out to determine exactly which population is in our below basic category. It can.
I mean, our elementary principals both are shaking their head because they go through the individual game meetings with their teams, so. Context?
It's majority of those.
It's a very,
scored in that area are-
very high percentage.
So here's our reading breakdown by 3rd grade on the left, 4th grade in the center, 5th grade on the right. Again, blue, advanced, green, Proficient, yellow, basic, and red below basic. And the same chart for math.
What are the grades again?
Third, fourth, fifth,
Third, fourth,
left to
fifth,
right.
okay. Can we go
Right.
back one slide?
Absolutely.
Should find out what the fourth grade people are doing.
I think you make a really good point, Dr. Darian, about those kids that land in yellow, and Dr. Anderson's just sharing now too. When we look at the data, there is generally a chunk of kids who are just a point or two below that cut score that we know fully well we can bump into that proficient range with the right work.
I always just, we throw in this context too, you know, the imaginary line, whatever a threshold line is between low basic, basic, proficient. You know, Dr. Anderson could count on his hand 3, 4, 5 kids that missed by 1. And then you take in 5th grade at Greenwich where there was, I don't know, 42 students last year, putting that to a percentage, well, that just wrecks a percentage. That's because the denominator's so low.
In addition, and I apologize, I'm just gonna jump back a few slides real quick. Greenwich's participation hit the 94 to 96% range for each of the tests. The state tells us that when we are below 95%, that any non-tested student becomes a non-proficient score. Greenwich's ELA participation was 94.6. I don't know if the state rounds that to 5 or if we got dinged. It's almost impossible to tell because we're talking a difference of 1 or 2 kids. The place where you're going to see that impact the most will be middle school. But first we have Kutztown Elementary. Deb, do you want to tell us about the picture that we're seeing on this was the leaf picture.
Oh, yes, this was first grade, enjoying the pleasures of being a first grader in fall and making leaf piles and jumping into them during recess.
So here are Kutztown Elementary's demographics. Interesting shift that their economically disadvantaged population has increased significantly last year and this year. And their special education population is on the decline. So here's KES's achievement. They reached 95 to 100% participation on all 3 subjects. So no concerns there with how the scores shook out.
I'm curious as to why proficient or advanced at 64% puts us in the red in the ELA, but 59 is green in math.
So the 59 in math. That's a great question.
Must be within some confidence interval that they're not sharing, it's in that, you know.
But I mean, 64% proficient in making red is less than 10%.
Stewart goes.
Yep.
Yeah, where the state
Oh,
goal
and
is
that's
might be the
true.
reason.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the increment of the statewide goal would be the reason. So the growth
It's not
for
a valid
KES,
measure.
what's that?
It's not a valid measure of achievement.
So the ELA just falling right under that statewide growth standard of 70, and math and science meeting the standard. Here is KES's breakdown by proficiency level. And then by grade level, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Reading is first.
You know, I'm not sure what the statistic would be that would be doing that, but
there's a tendency to think that, okay, the kids that were yellow moved up into green, or green moved down into yellow, and rather track individual kids and see how many kids move from one to another level, as opposed to the global, this is the numbers. When you look at these charts, at least I mentally think of the things tracking across, like the number of proficient kids went down and the basic went up when moved from fourth to fifth. And it is the number did, but is that what happened to the kids?
A lot of times those
Yeah.
lines go in every direction.
So, and that's what, I mean, that's just a small piece of the puzzle of what the elementary school data teams meet and talk about when they get together.
Every trimester.
Trimester, yeah, each trimester. So, they'll take an individual student's report and not only look at where they track PSSA historically, but their STAR reports historically over time as well. And that's when they'll develop their plans individually for students.
So another data point I wanted to pull out, two of the data points we have to report to the state annually are our third grade reading proficiency and our seventh grade math proficiency. So here's third grade reading across grades, all third grade from years 16, 17 through last year, just to see what that trend looks like of proficient in the lighter blue and advanced in the darker blue. And then another point of comparison is always the, which many of you may have seen in the newspaper, but it's nice when it's all lined up on a spreadsheet, how we fared compared to our colleagues in the county. There are 50 elementary schools across the county, and of those, KES and GES both fared very well in rankings among their peers. Any questions on elementary? Okay, here's a view from our middle school concert at the holidays. Here are the last year, well, the trending demographics for the middle school. Participation for PSSAs for the middle school was about 91% across all three contents. So that means that all of our non-testers were designated non-proficient.
Why was the participation so low?
Opt-outs and refusals.
Definitely, and in the last 2 years, there was more opt-outs than previous years because this was a change in the way the state asked us to reinforce that, and there was a growth in parents wanting to make that choice. There's no better way to put it. And honestly, the way, because the state, because of some of the things the state did, but also, for a variety of reasons, we used to really, because the state told us to put parents through kind of a ringer if they wanted to sign them out, you had to come in, you had to do, and over time that just didn't hold weight where it was ultimately the parent refused, they refused, right? Like it's just, we still encourage. The Keystone we have a little bit more teeth to because it is one of the, pathways to 158 to graduation. Susan Flicker's team works really, really hard to say, hey, you want to come in and take this because it's one of your shots, just in case something else doesn't go right. But the middle school and elementary don't really have those teeth to it, and those schools were more convincing to their parents that they didn't want to take it, I guess, it comes down to.
Well, I mean, it's their option, and we don't really have a choice if they opt out one way or the other. So.
No, because it used to be, it had to, the language used to say it had to be a religious exemption or something, but the fact is that didn't really hold up. The parents can still exempt.
There was that, what was that guy's name? He was going to KU and giving lectures and stuff and coaching parents up on how to opt out. at one point. That was a few years ago, wasn't it, I think? But in any event,
What's the goal? What's
I think
the benefit?
a lot of times with families I've sat down to talk to before they make that choice to do the opt-out or to refuse, is that some families feel they're sending a message to the state saying, we don't believe in this test. Unfortunately, the state doesn't get that message when it comes through this means. It only hurts us on this line.
And honestly, some will just say, it's stressful for their child,
Yeah.
and that's true for some kids.
What's the goal?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, what are we getting from
And
this?
it's stressful for the kids who want to do well.
Right.
So often it is our best kids that are being opted out.
I guess that's the other way of asking the question, what are the kids gaining by taking these tests?
What do they individually get
Yeah.
out of it? It is used as a data point when developing our plan, but it's our least responsive data, so, because it comes so late, so,
well, it's hard to disagree with them that these tests should be just thrown in the trash can where they belong, and we should not be saddled with them. But since that's not the case, and we're not gonna
as elected members of the
change
public, you're very much entitled to those opinions.
But since we're not allowed to change that, well, that's my personal opinion.
Right.
I've said it before, and I mean, these tests are very difficult, and I'm not sure what we get out of them sometimes. But at the 91% participation rate, our numbers were artificially lowered.
Yes.
Correct.
So are we able to go back and see how we actually perform without the states artificially decreasing? Because, the kids that did not test, they automatically declared them.
Non-proficient. But it doesn't give them a designation of basic or below basic. It just declares them non-proficient.
Right.
So our local data makes that a little tricky to look at because it just eliminates those kids from the count of testers. So what you see here are the kids who tested, and that would be our percentages.
Yeah.
But I did skip over the growth. I want to just take a moment for the growth scores for the middle school.
Well, I mean, obviously, we need to do something with math at the middle school. And, I mean, that's been an issue for a couple of years now. So it's not really new. I mean, but we need to do something to improve the math.
So we'll circle back to that a little further along.
Is there a trend where, looking at the elementary schools currently, the below basic percentage is much lower than the middle school, where the elementary schools,
Yeah,
there were similar levels 4 years ago. Why is that increasing when they go to the middle school?
So there's a couple things that I did to kind of try to work through a little bit of this. So I skipped the reading slide. Let me just give a quick moment for the reading slide. It's very, very few kids in the below basic range. So I don't want to dwell on this one when we can move to the next one where there's a lot more to talk about. I want to talk specifically about our 8th graders because our 8th graders, let's assume about 100 kids in the grade level, 50 of them also took a Keystone. So when we look at those scores on their PSSA, we have to remember that 2 weeks later, those same kids turned around and took a Keystone test. Here's how they did on their Keystone. Just those 50 kids. No one got below basic. There were only 20% of kids were not proficient, but all the rest are advanced or proficient. So I took that one step further and I literally lined them up side by side. And as I looked down a list of 50 kids' names and put their Keystone and their PSSA right below it, here's how it read. If they got advanced on their Keystone, they got proficient on their PSSA. If they got proficient on their Keystone, they got basic on their PSSA. So almost every single kid of those 50 Keystone and PSSA 8th graders scored better on their Keystone than on their PSSA.
Well, that would almost make sense. They're being taught algebra, so they will do better on an algebra test than on an 8th grade test on material they haven't been taught.
For 8th graders, there are many standards that they are not even, those students are not even seeing in that current year because they're in an algebra class.
And there's a drastic shift between 5th grade math standards and 6th grade math standards. They look worlds different.
I'll make my 30-second Heisenberg principle speech. The Heisenberg principle says the more emphasis you place on any one indicator, the less reliable it becomes as an indicator. And so PSSA is one indicator. And so what we're always trying to do is triangulate, because that data, quite frankly, looks so bad statewide. What other data would we look at that would give us some context for where our kids are? And that's really what, it's that discussion where this came out. So how are our Keystone kids doing after taking the PSSA? And so we also have some additional local data. So we don't want to completely minimize or throw in the trash the PSSA data, because it's data that we've looked at. But I also don't think it's the only thing that we should be considering to know where our kids are.
On the other hand, I mean, what this tells us is that it is not necessarily the level of instruction that's at fault because of the lower score. However, okay, I mean, I'll voice a heresy. Is there that much value in kids getting algebra in 8th grade that it is overwhelms the fact that there is obviously stuff they're not learning? How important is the stuff they're not learning for later, past algebra? You get into geometry, you get into trig, that's a little bit more than manipulation of variables. Is there stuff they're missing there? Maybe we shouldn't offer algebra in 8th grade anymore. I mean, I know that's a heresy, but
I think kids are, their readiness for algebra varies all the way from a very, very few people that are algebra ready in 6th grade to some students that aren't algebra ready.
But I'm not talking about that readiness. I'm talking about the stuff they don't get a chance to learn.
Well, but I think readiness probably has to be considered, because do we really want to hold half of our class back from algebra, even though they are ready and doing well, because of what they're missing on another test that we probably have less confidence in?
But I want to know what it is that they're not getting. I mean, is it important or not? I don't know what it is that they're not getting.
We can't take the algebra away at 8th grade, because then that is going to really hurt our kids at the high school level, because the idea was to try to accelerate some of these kids so that they have the opportunity to take some of the advanced classes in math, with stats and calculus that they ordinarily wouldn't have the time to do. And
so we made a value judgment on this in a very small instance this year, sitting with the high school schedule, right, and sitting with some high school information. We had an increasing number of students going into 9th grade who were taking pre-algebra. And if you're taking pre-algebra in 9th grade, there's some trouble there, because what it limits you from doing in 10th grade and what it limits you from doing in 11th grade potentially, if you are in pre-algebra in 9th grade, you're going to have a really difficult time being a VCTC completer. Well, we value that, so we want to do anything we can to prevent that from being a barrier. If it's going to delay your entry into science classes and your other math classes, as we're saying. So we identified a small group of students that we wanted to provide some additional support to that we could in the schedule. And the idea was, well, where would we place that additional, these are 8th grade students, where do we place the focus of that additional support? Do we place it on PSSA standards or pre-algebra, algebra standards? And when we sat in the room, I mean, I was in favor of this, and I think our team it was algebra standards, because rather than worry about what it says on that test, we were worried about what they have access to in 9th grade, and 10th grade, and 11th grade. Your point is a good one, is that
I just want to know what it is they're not learning.
We'd have to be able to pull that out and look 2 years down the road and see if those holes are still there, of those things that they're not achieving on, specifically in the PSSA versus the algebra.
This is my opinion. I think another question that could be asked is what's actually being assessed in PSSA, and how well is it connected to regular standards? If there's such a disconnect across the state in achievement on it, I really question what it is, and until we see large numbers of districts outperforming us by miles, because I think we have to continue to target improvement. I think that we have to look at other measures other than PSSA for the next several years to inform where our improvement should be, because I think the PSSA is it's always been somewhat unreliable.
And that middle level, we offer Algebra 1 in 8th grade. There are some schools where it's offered in 6th or 7th or 8th. I'd be interested to look at their data and this exact comparison of how are those kids doing on a 6th grade PSSA or a 7th grade PSSA compared to their Algebra Keystone. Because I think that may be part of what's leading to this middle level PSSA. I don't want to call it a crisis, it's a PSSA. But the state is at 35% proficiency. I don't believe that across the state of Pennsylvania, that's really where our kids are. I think that's a reflection of an assessment. And this conversation is actually making me think more and more about how much is that impacting across the state in other grades than just 8th, where it's hitting us so hard.
Am I correct that from some of the things I've read, that this is actually a national thing?
Yes, middle level math is a national. If you look at the NAEP scores, they plummeted post-COVID.
And for an 8th grader, between the two tests, the Keystone would be a more important test than the PSSA.
And that's the message that we have shared with 8th grade math, is that's our goal for kids for high school.
Right,
So we kind of have to forego some better scores sometimes if we want to see that success for algebra and those kids taking that algebra course. So I'm not saying there's not an issue at middle level math. I'm not saying.
No, I don't think that the issue that we would target today in middle level math is algebra.
Right.
I think we would target other areas and try to use some of our other local data, STAR, for example, to help inform what it is we would do to impact kind of where kids are. It's our non-algebra kids. It's our non-algebra kids that are giving us the results that are so challenging. Even, I mean, there's a modest, I'll say modest, there's a drop between the kids who are advanced in the Keystone. Those kids are only proficient on PSSA, and so that there, I just don't know what is the formula they're using in the PSSA. I know that in 2010, it was really messed up.
how do you remediate those kids then? Because even if we want to look at that PSSA and say, okay, we don't know if those measurements are valid and we don't know how they apply to our district, it still is identifying an area of need, I think.
What we need to do is, in my opinion, is follow through with what our comprehensive plan goals are and develop an MTSS system that boils down to individualized data meetings like elementary school.
We gotta teach those kids up regardless.
Continue to the middle school to support those kids because, in the end, whether it's basic, proficient in that range, the kids who are performing below basic, there's a hole there somewhere,
Because
right?
even with the growth stuff,
there's something that's missing in the skill set.
if the kids are already behind.
Yep.
And they get a year of growth from that point, they're still gonna be that much more behind, so.
It takes exponentially
Right,
longer to fill gaps.
So, there's still a segment of students here, we need to come up with something.
Absolutely,
to try
you're
to
gonna
help them
see
out.
that really clearly in the local data as well, and I think it supports exactly that. And to what Christian said, that's that MTSS piece as one bookend of supporting individual kids with what they need when they need it to get them where they need to go. On the other end of that, on kind of the bigger picture end of the bookends, is that, I don't know how long ago exactly, a very beautiful literacy framework was created here in the district. 3 or 4?
Yeah.
I think it was pre-code, so.
Yeah.
But that exists, and if you talk to any teacher of any realm of ELA or reading in the district, they know what all of the tenets of that literacy plan are. We don't have anything like that for math, that really lays out, here's what we believe about the teaching of math, here's what we believe about incorporating the standards of mathematical practice. And so that committee is coming together to start building that mathematics plan to parallel our literacy plan, so that we are philosophically all on the same page about what we believe about the teaching of math. Things have changed a lot since 2013, enormously, and the emphasis on more executive functioning within math and more problem solving and persistence and the ability to go back and check your own work and monitor how you're doing and think about the big picture, that has shifted a lot from when we learned math and learn the algorithm, we have to make sure that our kids are getting that experience in every classroom as well. So, and that those standards are the biggest shift from how our teachers learned to how we now need to teach. So that's work that we need to do, and that mathematics plan is gonna help us just lay out a framework for that as well.
One last thing about the Keystone score. You know, Melissa alluded to the fact that half of the 8th grade is taking algebra. You have to remember the other half of that Keystone score is the kids who took algebra in 9th grade. And so that's our lower achieving class of kids from the previous year. And so it's again, for me, the big question mark is what are they assessing in PSSA? Because when those kids who were not in algebra in 8th grade were taking it now in 9th grade, all of a sudden it's a very different look than what we saw when they took the PSSA. So it just gives us a lot to dig into.
And I think if it's a more important test, the kids may give a better effort for the Keystone than they may
They value it.
PSSA. Was my point, because if it's a more important test.
I think
then-
there's some value in having some conversations with kids about what is that experience like, taking those back to back. I think there's a lot we can learn from some conversations with kids from that lens too.
I want to come back to the idea that it's not just Kutztown, it's not just Pennsylvania, it seems to be a national thing. And I'm wondering, assuming that the tests that are given all over this, not everyone has a PSSA, they have some other sort of test, but they're all testing basically the same stuff. It's the Common Core sort of thing that developed a while back. And I've always worried about the Common Core in the elementary school in terms of readiness, that the kids were not ready to do what Common Core thought they should do there. Maybe it goes beyond that. Maybe 12 and 13-year-olds, right, well aware of the enormous cognitive jump, because I taught 7 days and 9th grade. 8th grade and 9th grade, it's a bigger jump than what happens to their bodies. Maybe they're just not ready for the goal that is being established. And we're spinning our wheels trying to even try to teach it. I mean, would we be well served to take a look at, I know the lower grade levels hate this, but middle school is preparing kids for the high school. What do the high school people need the kids to be able to do? And that should be our goal, rather than something the state has said, well, this is the standard we want you to meet, especially given, as Randy points out, the uselessness of this whole process. A more important thing is what do they need to know to succeed in high school? What do they need to take that math, to get 6 kids getting a 5? And there's almost no school that does that except us.
Coming, Dr. Darren, I think you're on something. Coming back to the US, because I was gone, I would say, this is gospel according to Steve, I would say that our instruction in the US has not kept up with the standard. The Common Core standards are, particularly in math, are very high. And I am wondering if nationwide we have really grappled with what are those standards asking us to do?
Well, it's asking the kids to do it too.
Yeah.
Maybe they really aren't capable.
And I question, I'm not making a declarative statement, I question whether instructionally nationwide, we have really made the adjustment that we need to for what's being assessed. But that would be an interesting study.
The data on the screen, just to bring it all back, is the exact same data we looked at here, just in a slightly different format. So the same group of kids on the left for Keystone, that's how their scores shook out compared to those same students' PSSA scores on the right. So visually, they both worked, but I thought it just gave a different view of the same thing. Okay, then we get to our middle
Really
school.
strive for 82 slides.
What's that?
We really had to go over 82
I know,
slides.
exactly. Here's our middle school comparison across the county.
You know, and as low as some of those proficiency numbers look at times, and you look at where we rank across the county, it's still from very good to, in math, it's high middle.
But 8th grade math was our lowest.
Right.
And we ranked the highest out of the county in 8th grade math. And that's only looking at PSSAs, that's not looking at 8th grade Keystones. So, any middle school questions? I think that's my last slide for middle school. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 7th grade, historical trend. This is that state reported 7th grade math, and so this just shows that across 16, 17 through 21, 22. I think the one interesting thing I notice on this is that pre-pandemic and post-pandemic look an awful lot alike. Okay, so this, sorry it cuts off a little bit on the bottom. This is just comparing Kutztown with the state averages across grades 3 through all the way up to Keystone Literature. So 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and then Keystone Lit compared to the state average. Same for math. Any questions? I know we've been talking about a lot as we go along. High school's a pretty quick hit in terms of scores, because we can't break it down by grade level in the same way that we can for PSSAs, because the scores that are reported are 11th graders last year. So the scores for Keystones are banked. So if you take it in 8th grade, it does not get reported until you are in 11th grade. So the scores that you're about to see for achievement are based on this year's seniors as 11th graders whenever they took the Keystone. So if they took it in 8th grade, if they took algebra in 8th grade, they may have taken literature in 10th, they may have taken biology in 9th. It gets banked until those kids are in 11th grade. So it's reported very, very differently. So it kind of becomes a little bit of apples and oranges when you jump up to the high school. Participation, good. We were at 95 to 97 across all 3 subject areas. And overall, those scores are looking fantastic compared to state averages and meeting our goals. And there are growth scores for the high school, all sitting at 100.
Just got a low start.
Well, growth.
But we're
Exactly.
making up for that.
Right. So here's a couple other indicators. I'm sorry, these are a little smaller to see, but the industry-based learning are credentials that students can earn based on taking their NOCD or other industry credentials. I think that's an important note to see how many of our students are being successful in that group or in that area. And then our career standards benchmark, which is relative to Act 339's College and Career Readiness Plan, in which all students develop a portfolio of activities that they've completed in grades 3 through 8. Our scores for elementary and middle school look very similar. We're at 94 to 100% completion with meeting that standard. And then we get to graduation rate. And I'm gonna throw the ball to Christian on this one because he shed some really good insight for me. As I was looking at this graduation rate, my anxiety was going up a little bit because 83 didn't feel like a good number.
Now, you'll see over the 2 years post-COVID, our graduation rate, 4-year cohort graduation rate was a little bit lower than it was previously, and that is because of decisions that we made about holding kids accountable in the high school years. When there was a year and a half where a small number of kids were kind of refusing to do anything, and we could throw them as many safety nets as possible, and they just refused. And Barry would call and say, "What do we do here?" I'm talking to my colleagues in the county, and some of them were just passing kids, and we said, "No, we're not doing that." And is that going to take a hit on our graduation rate for a couple of years? I think this would be this past year would have been the last year. I think this year kind of flushes out, but they were decisions that we made to hold kids accountable rather than just say, "That's fine, don't do it." A couple of them bumped to that 5th year, which bumps them out of the 4-year rate. A couple moved on to some other, some other things, but it's not the prettiest look when you see that bump. It was intentional in the individual case of each student about what was best for them.
And that's one of those times when that kind of good decision trumps any score that may look red because of it.
You know, and at the end of the day, that's, well, whether it's a decision about algebra, with some extra time, it's algebra, or is it PSSA, or is it graduation rate, or is it what's right for that kid at that time? We always hold ourselves accountable making the decision that's right for the kid at that time, because of what it's going to do for their future. So that's the unfortunate reason why that goes to the calendar.
Is there a measure then of kids that go on to do their equivalency testing and stuff, like their GEDs, like, do we have success then? I know there were some kids last year that I had heard, they then went on to do stuff.
5-year kids this year, right? There were 5-year graduation kids that had to complete a couple of requirements here, but they'll never show back up in the 4-year. We still get a 5-year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll have the 5-year grade.
I think we're often insufficient data to show it.
Right.
So, Ms. Spencer, if we send a student to a National Guard program, we had a student who graduated with the National Guard program 2 weeks ago. The GED, and then they go to National Guard. That was the best for the child. We take that hit, if you will. And if we send a student or two to, let's say, we have a student leaving in a week for, what's the place called? Job Corps. So they'll get their Job Corps, they get the driver's license, get all that stuff paid for, finished, and their GED, but that counts against us. But that's really good for them. That's a really good, it's a good thing. But I can tell you, I know who those 7 kids are. Doesn't feel good. We have a revolving door with Judge Brett, because we were the ones first to look at those criteria, which constituted being present for an educational experience. November 22nd, 2021. We stuck to that. In the long run, for a little bit, but it's paying off.
You also pay off for the next couple of years with kids who may not believe you and say you're not going to graduate.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So here are Keystone comparisons across the county. You like that? All right, I'm gonna pause. It is 7:12. We don't have another meeting after, but I'll let you guys determine. This local data is really, I can explain it and kind of look through it very quickly, or give you some time to digest it. We can talk about it. I wanna let the committee decide how they wanna proceed.
Understanding the STAR, it's important to get a glimpse of that STAR data because we talk about the flaws, no data point is perfect, the flaws of state assessment data. And, we can speak to all of our schools. We want to use it more in the secondary, but I can look at Dr. Anderson, Mrs. Barnes, and, this is the data that they're using more readily in those trimester meetings because it goes out to the individual and it's more responsive based off of the assessment.
Does each bar represent a student?
Yep, so
Okay.
real close to that. So this is from our Renaissance STAR testing. This is current. This was end of trimester 1 for elementary and winter testing for middle school. So this is our most current data on where our students stand based on an assessment that changes based on as the kids grow. So that cut score, you're gonna watch that proficiency line go up as we go up by grade level. So this is our current kindergarten at GES. You'll notice it'll go GES, KES, and you'll notice the bars will change because that at GES, it is representative of 1 child per bar. And then when you look at KES for kindergarten, the bars get a little smaller. But I think what this just shows kind of at a quick glance is visually how many of our kids are in that green and blue compared to how many kids are in yellow and red. And we have a lot of systems in place to swoop up those kids in yellow and red at elementary. And that's where the MTSS process is working. When we look at those scores coming out of 5th grade, we can see that what we're doing to support kids who have gaps or need additional support, we can see that a lot of those things are working, which is why we need to grow that system into the middle level. So 1st grade, Greenwich. 1st grade at KES. Deb, I've never seen a green bar in the middle of the blue bars before, and I cannot figure out why. I pulled the report multiple times and it keeps showing up that way. There's some anomaly going on in that 3rd kid in the blue, I don't know. Never seen that in all my years of STAR. So first grade, then second grade at GES. And again, it's just that quick glance to kind of see the visual of how our students are doing in reading. Here's second grade at KES. Third grade GES. Third grade at KES.
What are we doing to support the kids that are really at 1150?
So I'm gonna ask, oh, the kids at 11:50?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get there. We'll try to answer that question at the end, but we're working on building out so those students might be identified as gifted. If they are, then there's supports built in there by their individual plan. If they're not, we are working, developing a school-wide enrichment program at KES this year, which is ready to expand into Greenwich, and Marge, you want to talk about it?
Sure. So we recognize that part of the learning experience for students should be more student-driven. And so our first pilot day is this coming Friday. We've surveyed all of the children and determined what they're interested in learning about, and have created cohorts, in some instances K to 5, some instances 3 to 5, but cohorts of students who have similar interests. And we're taking an hour and a half of each one of these 6 Fridays to give students learning experiences in authentic learning that is highly interesting to them, with the idea being that if this is something that we find to be beneficial for students to build a more well-rounded experience for them, that it's something that we can implement on a more frequent basis at the elementary level. And so the idea of a student who may be a higher achieving student, this gives them the opportunity to dig into something that is of high interest to them and apply what they've learned in a variety of different subject areas.
Now, it's highly likely that those students that really stand out, at the top are identified as gifted, so I can think of students, obviously there's a student in KES, probably in Greenwich too, I can think of, but I'm talking as much, who has a more advanced vocabulary than I do. And what that student does is works on developing newspaper articles and, works on writing that is so advanced and beyond the classroom curriculum. I think there's a student in Greenwich who's reading on like 12th level. So it's really the books that are targeted towards that student. Like they're just extreme outliers.
But I think those children who have those higher scores are also the way that we instruct reading at the elementary level with the workshop model. It lends itself to allowing the child to be engaged in reading material that is at their level, and it allows the teacher to use a learning progression to help that child develop skills that are at their level of readiness, so that they can continue to excel in the area where they have a high level of ability.
And that's where the art of a teacher differentiating is so critical, because a student in elementary school reading on that really high level doesn't necessarily mean we want them reading Stephen King. So it's still finding the artful act of finding and helping students select books and reading materials that are going to still be appropriate of interest with that high level of reading ability. So just to keep plowing through these, this is 4th grade at GES and 4th grade at KES.
And just because we're in this, I think it's valuable to hear this. So we keep talking about these data meetings that happen as a part of the MKSS system. Just ask Dr. Anderson to share a little bit about. The meetings are slightly different between buildings, but the concept's the same, and the outcome is largely the same. So Dr. Anderson, share a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to speak to Deb, but I know when we take a look, we'll look at this, and we start with like a global view like this, and then we'll start to break it down into classroom and the individual level. And you'll see that, again, each one of those bars is an individual student. And what we can do is we can actually click on those students. We can see their past history, testing, and so forth. So what we'll be able to see is where they were from the first trimester to the second trimester, and know that, are they making growth? Are they expected growth? Are they falling below the line? Are they rising above the line? And we pay a lot of attention to, again, those higher growth students and what are we doing for them, as well as students that are right around that proficiency benchmark area. And one of the beauties of this system is we can actually go in and see a student's test and look for patterns and see where it is that they may be struggling with, and we'll use that as an area to start building and taking a look at our curriculum and saying, is this something that we did cover, or is this something that we didn't cover? And if we did, what more can we do for these types of students to help them to better grasp these concepts? And that's when we start building those individual plans through our MTSS model for students who may need a little bit more support. And then we monitor their progress and the interventions that are being put in place. And then come the next test, see where they are in relation to where they were in the beginning, and then we have the opportunity to evaluate the interventions that we put in place. Are they working? And are they moving the student in the direction that we need to be moving? If they are, great. If they're not, why not? And again, continue with that process again.
This system allows us to plot every student every time they take this assessment so that we can see a trajectory. And it'll plot a line that says this is what a year's worth of growth should look like across each testing experience. And we can see where kids are excelling, we can see where kids may be struggling, we can see where kids who started perhaps far below are showing a trajectory that may gain them more than a year's growth, that might be what they need to start building up and catching up.
And part of what we've learned too over the years is taking a look at not only academic data, but behavioral data, attendance, those types of things, because they can affect where a student is in their learning. And we have our teachers and a counselor in there as well, because some of the students may need some emotional supports in order for them to be able to focus academically. It may be their behaviors that are affecting their ability to learn, instead of rather their lack of understanding that's affecting and causing behavior. So that's a nice key that we start to look in there too, to make sure that our students are getting the emotional supports that they need in addition to the academic supports.
This is gonna sound like a non-sequitur, but I'm working on a thought. What grade levels are self-contained and which ones by subject?
They're all homogeneously grouped within their grade level.
What about self-contained fifth grade?
Fifth grade at Greenwich, language arts is taught by one teacher, math is taught by a different teacher.
What about the other subjects?
Taught by the teacher with
Math
those
and
students.
science,
Yeah.
science and so, or
Yeah.
math and science, ELA and social studies.
Yeah.
At KES, each teacher teaches all of the subjects, but the students in fourth and fifth grade do switch.
How many different teachers like fourth grade teachers?
Fourth grade we have 4, fifth grade we have 3.
We have 2.
And yeah, and it varies from year to year. Like this year, 2 of the fifth grade teachers, one's teaching writing and social studies, and the other one's teaching reading. So it varies.
So then here's fifth grade at GES. And fifth grade at KES. Sticking with ELA, moving right into sixth grade. You can see where our current sixth graders are in their most recent test in December. Seventh grade. And eighth grade. Now, we stick with eighth grade for a moment. We're gonna go backwards from eighth grade down for math. The most interesting one is definitely eighth grade. Our algebra students did not take the STAR assessment. The kids who are not in algebra are what you see represented in that star chart at the top. Actually, The lower chart is what's called a classroom diagnostic test, which is an algebra-specific, state-developed diagnostic assessment that we can use. And you'll see all the kids are in this little red range right here, almost everybody, couple in the green. This was taken in September. So there's no concern that they're in red because they hadn't started taking algebra yet. It was the very, very, very beginning of the year. So we have all those kids in algebra who are on the brink of moving right into that range of this green scaled score should predict that they would be successful on the Keystone. These are the kids that we need to spend some time and energy figuring out what their needs are and what we need to best do to support them. Okay, then we go backwards. 7th grade. 6th grade.
Wait.
5th grade GES. 5th grade KES. 4th grade GES. 4th grade at KES. 3rd at GES. 3rd at KES. 2nd at Greenwich. 2nd at KES. And then 1st graders are taking STAR math for the first time in 1st grade. They do not take it as kindergartners. So I always take 1st grade math with a little bit of a grain of salt.
And not all first graders take math, there's only when they move out of early literacy that they start taking math.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Go back to the 8th grade one.
Sure.
This was given September?
The CDT on the bottom was given in September. The STAR at the top was given in December.
Do we give one in September? Start.
Yes, we would have given a STAR in September as well. I'd have to pull that one up
Okay, it would be interesting,
to just compare the beginning to the
and
middle.
also the end of 7th grade.
So, what I find interesting, and I'm just maybe pulling off my rocker here, but if you look at just pull Kutztown, the percentage of proficient in the green trends downward as you go through 6th, 7th, and 8th. That section seems, it could just be the charts are deceiving, but as you were going through it, I kind of.
Where the proficiency benchmark
Yeah.
is, like you see it shift, yeah.
See it shift, it trends in the negative direction.
Just for advanced proficiency.
Yeah, just an observation.
Yeah, just an observation, and it seems like it's maybe starting before 8th grade where it's bottoming out.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Were you watching it like it was?
No, there was,
movie
yeah, there
reference?
was a graph compared to state. The line graph, or line graph, where it compared to state averages over time.
We did that one.
Okay, because I missed it.
Sorry.
But can you go back to a second?
Yep. Sorry.
Just on that 8th grade math one again,
Mm-hmm.
so the bottom test that was done in September, when are those kids taking the Keystone?
May.
So at this point, we have to wait to May to see if
They will
There
do,
was-
so this
there was growth for
CDT,
them during the year.
yeah, the CDT is about 56 to 58 questions long, so it's really extensive. They've broken it down so that we can give specific parts of that CDT, and we will be using that in 8th grade to check in and see how the students who will be algebra testing are doing. But I don't know that we'll get the full battery test again, just because instructional time sometimes is more important than more testing time. So if we can do subject-specific parts of this, we might not do the whole thing again. All right, you want the line graph?
I just think, we go through all this and we look at, we always compare ourselves to ourselves, but we also have to base it off of something. Looking at the comparison of Center Area School District and that same line with the state is just always interesting. We all follow the same pattern, we dip below that state line just a little bit briefly there. You'll see it's a little bit in 6th grade and 8th grade actually by a hair. And then in the end, our kids are achieving, on those keystone exams that were developed at the state level to represent what students needed to be able to know and perform at the end of their high school career. Like that's what they were, one time there was going to be 10 of them. We're fortunate there's only 3, and these 10 would have been just a massive amount of time, and that's all school would have been. But, when it gets to whether it doesn't matter whether they're taking that in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and some in 12th grade taking it again, they're reaching that level of proficiency better. We are reaching as a school that level of proficiency better than, much better than the state, better than anybody in the county. In the end, globally, the system works. There's just some bumps along the way. And that's something I remind myself, as a person, as a parent, as an educator, is that growth is not a linear progression. It doesn't happen in a perfect line. There's bumps and bruises. So, there's imperfections here and always areas for improvement. The end result, we're pretty happy with. Going back to areas to improve, we truly believe that developing that MTSS system in the secondary that will allow us to be more granular with the way we help our students who are struggling versus those who have already demonstrated those levels of proficiency or are well on a track to do that. Something we haven't talked about at this level a lot, but if you go back to,
It's okay, I feel better ahead.
Yeah,
He's
yes.
trying to follow.
Cecilia's good.
If you go back to kindergarten, reading real quick, STAR. Something you're going to hear us talk about more over the next couple months is, so look at these kids in kindergarten. These are students in kindergarten in December. The large majority of them are reading at a kindergarten level proficiently. There's that group in the red and the yellow, and we have to dig into their stories and what readiness is there for them. We do have the opportunity as a district this spring to apply for a pre-K counts classroom or classrooms. Pre-K counts is free pre-K classrooms for low-income families. Just the application doesn't even open until February, but as we meet up in February, we're going to talk about it a lot. I know that goes in conjunction with talking about spaces, in spaces that we have or that we don't have. Just some of the metrics metrics around a pre-K counts classroom is the funding is up to $10,000 per student up to 15 students. So if you have a full classroom of 15 students, that's $150,000. That roughly pays for the class. It pays for the teacher and the materials that are there. There's some front-end costs, of course, getting the classroom outfitted, but largely annually, if you have 15 students that qualify and they come for free, it's being paid for by the state. There's a lot of details that go into that, but it's at some point, if you have full classrooms, it's a no-brainer in a way that you can help those kids that are in, probably some in the blue, and definitely some in the yellow and red, be more ready for kindergarten when they get there. We've tried to track data. Dr. Anderson did a lot of the legwork on it as far as like pre-K numbers for us historically. They're somewhat inconclusive because, honestly, our demographics are changing. Our economic disadvantage numbers are rising. Pretty steadily over the last 5-6 years. Who did not have access to pre-K was kind of a mixed bag previously. I think some of it was just logistics of living pretty far away from any programs. Some of it is just families who feel like they have that taken care of at home and do. But as we see our demographics shifting, considering pre-K classrooms is definitely something we need to walk down all the way and see if it's the right move for us. The other thing that, we really focus on is that this is one piece. I know it's the core of what we do, but it's only one piece of a student's education. Sometimes I think the most important things we do for those kids who are at the 1150 scores all the way to the top is helping them figure out how to fit in with their peers when they have a reading level and a speaking level that's way over everybody's head. And that goes on all ends of the spectrum. Finding kids, helping kids find passions and things that they just really care about is becoming, it was always important. I think it's becoming more important as the finite skills of education are becoming blurred and what they mean in the workforce in 20 years, 30 years from now, when our students are going to be the workforce. So they really have to find things that they're passionate about and develop the specific skills or the general skills of collaboration and creativity. And, some of them are buzzwords, resilience, but what does it mean when I need to transition to a completely different type of work as my industry changed? And maybe it's not obsolete, it just changed. So it's today's first day of this calendar year in 2023 for us. I think the class of 2029 is sitting in 6th grade this year, and it's just, you start putting those numbers together, and all of us, most of us, are anticipating Jetson type life at some point. But it's not quite here, but the world of work is certainly changing.
For the pre-K, in order to make that happen for next year, ideally, when would we want to have that to be able to vote on it?
It's so that we have to wait for the window to open to even have a full timeline. The window opens, I think, second week of February, right?
Third week, I think, my meeting's on the 17th.
So third week of February, and then an application is due like June, sometime in June. The trickiest part from a financial standpoint, speaking with our colleagues that have done it, is that if you commit to it as a board, we are committing to it as a district to a potential, in year 2 and 3, you're gonna fill your classes. Because once people know it's available, they're going to use it. Year 1, there's some gray because you don't get notified if you were awarded the program until August. At that point, just some families have their plans and don't want to adjust. So there's a chance you only have 8 kids in your class the first year, and well, the cost for the classroom for us as a district might be $30,000 or $80,000. So that's stuff that we'll talk about. So we're looking at a decision from the board sometime in that. It's probably in March, realistically, because by the time we get the application open in February, we wouldn't know if we got it, but a commitment from the board would probably be something in March, which makes sense because it's good for us timeline-wise with the budget, because we'll know what we're looking at as a potential loss. But that's if you go with one, and then that decision is 1 room or 2 rooms in the first year. If you feel like you're definitely gonna have 15, then you open a second. Because you don't have to open 2 in 1 year. You can open 1 year, 2 in year 2, where you probably would likely be getting more filled. So just tricky parts of navigating the grant, but outside of the spatial needs and outside of the small financial potential burden in year 1, it's not a lot of downsides.
Is there any way we could put out a survey to the community to see who would be interested in that?
A survey like that is something we have to do as part of the application process. Okay. That's one of the applications, but again, that's open to February, but we would have to.
And when will we get the results of that survey back?
We gotta get them back before the application is due in June for sure. And I guess as I say, we need a commitment for the board in March. Until the application is filed, the application is not filed in June. So I think really any commitment until then is just the application's not filed. So I guess maybe you're right. We don't set a timeline of commitment is when we know there's a desire and need.
They only open this up for rebid every so many years.
It's every 5 years.
This is the year it's open that we can even apply again. And so they don't reveal a lot of the information up front. It's come to this meeting, then we're going to give you the information, and then the application is. So it's not like it's shrouded in mystery. It's just they're trying to control the process.
What we're trying to avoid, if we ultimately open one, we'll go and visit Wilson. Wilson last year was granted 2. But because they weren't told until August, they didn't open the classrooms until October. And so, so we're really looking at, okay, how can we avoid that? So, but again, ultimately, the commitment is when we submit the application.
I'm just trying to think of commitment from the community though, because wasn't it like 2 years ago, BCIU wanted to do a pre-K program through the school and,
That was a before and after care program.
yeah, and there was like very little.
But one of the reasons there was little interest in that is because most of those families would say, well, how am I getting them from there to their pre-K or pre-K to there? It was more of that was more of the issue. It's that unless you encompass like a long enough time to get them to work online, then it's not, they have to find something that fits that anyway. So that was our issue with that. You're right. But it was before and after care, which sounded great. And then somebody said, wait, how am I getting my kid from here to here when I'm still working?
Would the pre-K program be an all-day program or?
It's an all-day program, but it is a little bit shorter. Yeah.
Like they arrive after other students would arrive, because they're often inside other elementary schools. So usually arrival is just after and dismissal is just before.
But that's when you go back and get a aftercare program, come in. So a pre and aftercare program like the YMCA one is really affordable. So if you're doing before care, free pre-K and aftercare, that's a huge savings to families that would have to find all day care.
Are we responsible for transportation for those kids then?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a mandatory program, so we don't have to get them there, but if they're gonna get there, we'll probably look at some type of transportation, so we'll look for partnerships on that. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to plan all those costs in the application process, but it's, the bang for your buck, for lack of a better term, could be extremely valuable for our demographics that are changing. And honestly, families that, there's many families that will always call.
I want to go back to middle school math, 8th grade in particular. It is comforting to know that we are not alone and that the problem is more universal. But that doesn't mean we don't have any responsibility to try to do something about it.
Right.
So let's forget about the rest of the country and just look at us. And there was a time when our math, 8th grade math was spectacular. It might have been the best in the county. It didn't show up in 9th grade, I will say, but supposedly they were the best math students in the county. Do we have something to look at what's going on? I mean, I think the first thing is to try to identify the problem. Is it the test? Is it the standard itself? Is it the kids? I mean, that's the first step. The next thing is, do we have something in place to try to fix it? I think part of it is we don't know quite exactly why. I think that's the first thing we need to do. So do we have something going on?
That's a lot of the work of that math committee, because the first step is looking at all of the data and having those conversations between elementary math folks and middle level math folks and high school level math folks. The frequency that they get a chance to talk across the entire system level is very, very rare. So just bringing that group together to look at these same data points, to have these conversations, to look at our curriculum, to look at our standards, to take a serious self-reflective look at how we're implementing those standards of mathematical practice compared to the other math standards. Those are all some of the pieces that committee is going to help roll out. And then on the other end of that, that's the system and the curriculum and the instruction. On the individual student level is that MTSS system that's going to help better support individuals along the way, because we can't wait for this to happen to make sure kids are getting what they need.
The first grade that did Common Core, they're now seniors, correct?
2013. We can't do it.
So it's 10 years, so. Yeah. I'm just wondering
What
if like.
standard did you,
Not quite,
what math?
10 years.
The first year that has kindergartners, or that were.
No, the first year was the Eureka, yeah, like when did that all start? I feel like that's the current group of seniors. Like, and they started in second or third grade.
Eureka, I think, was
Eureka started in 16, 17.
Yeah.
So we certainly are not seeing kids that were Eureka starters.
Yeah.
But we had other forms of Common Core before that, though.
Sure, Common Core came to the table in 2013. It took a lot of time to make the shift. It was, I mean, that was, of all the standards and all the changes that happened with Common Core, the math shift was, and I think still continues to be, the bigger challenge.
Yeah, no, and I say that because I've seen that with my own kids going through it, and I have a math background and I struggle to help them with their homework in 5th grade, and like, so how is that translating to the trending that we're seeing 8th grade overall? Like, is that where we're really seeing the dip consistently over the last several years? Like, what is the?
Let me dig in and follow our Eureka students and see what that kind of tracking looks like.
Is Eureka working?
I've been in districts comparing math programs. Changing a program is not going to ever make the difference for several reasons. I think Eureka is a really strong resource to support math research. Great help. It is, I think it's better aligned, and I think it really gives teachers the understanding of how those math practices inform how we teach math.
Well, I mean, that's why we
see that
went with that, but
taking
that's
hold.
why we went with it, because it's supposed to be better aligned with the, and when we say Common Core, it's actually PA Common Core.
Yep.
Which is a little different than just,
Of course.
so, but, but is it, I mean, because if we had it since 16, we should have an idea of whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And that's, again, work that needs to fall to that committee as well, because one of the things that I think is really important, Eureka is not a Pennsylvania product, and it was birthed from New York, to take a really hard look at the PA standards for grade 6 and grade 7.
But it was the best one that was aligned
Absolutely.
with the.
And I would say it still continues to be.
Right.
I don't think changing a resource, it would do nothing but cause a dip from implementation of a new resource that looks almost the same as any other in the Common Core era.
It does seem to work through 5th grade.
Say that again?
It does seem to be working through 5th grade, whether it's the program or the.
Which is why we need a chance for elementary folks to talk about what that looks like and sounds like in a math class in elementary, with middle level and high school, to say, what are the things we believe a math classroom should look like? Because that's where I think you find the most inconsistencies.
K through 5, K through 5 also have developed supports for students who are struggling, you know, and so that's working alongside of this process. Yeah, that's working alongside of the core curriculum all the time.
I've closed my laptop.
You said you couldn't talk about it for hours.
I can talk about it better than you can.
I'll just say, it's a lot of data to ingest.
It
and,
is.
What Christian was saying, is that I think ultimately, where are the students ending up? It's easy to get bogged down with like one picture where you see more yellow or, you know, overall, are all of our students trending towards that ending place? I think we are. We certainly can do things better, but I think from a global standpoint, we're doing quite well. So I don't think we need any major deviations from what we've been doing for the past 10 plus years. But changing our support system and how we implement support is going to be, I think, a big helper in getting some of those math scores up, where when we look at the same graph in another 3 or 4 years, we're gonna be like, okay, we've implemented that in middle school, and then now we're starting to see those changes.
Anyone else? Thank you, that was a lot of data. It was amazing to put it all together since whenever the state came out. What was that, like December 24th?
Yep, about that.
Thank you for your
But if
reference.
there's any other questions, don't hesitate to send those to us and we can address
We
those.
can look at the data and make your own evaluation. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.